In this video, we are talking about game theory. What is it? Where does it come from? And how is it relevant to us as business strategists? If you've never been exposed to game theory before today, you may have seen the movie A Beautiful Mind. It's about the life story of the Nobel Prize winning economist John Nash. And in that movie, though I don't know if this is at all accurate with what happened in real life, Mr. Nash has a brainstorm while at a bar about how inefficient it is that all the men in the bar are hitting on the one prettiest girl in the room, and that it leads to bad outcomes for everyone in the bar. While any one individual gentleman in the bar might be better off hitting on the prettiest girl in the bar, all of them end up worse off at the end of the day, or almost all of them end up worse off at the end of the day if they all have the same strategy for finding a dance partner in the bar. So the idea there, or the basic premise, is that these gentlemen are not alone in a vacuum, all just hitting on one pretty girl. Their success at the end of the night in this bar is going to depend on what the other men and women in the bar are doing. It's a far cry from the application we are going to use game theory for, but the basic premise holds true. Game theory is the study of interactions between two or more players in a situation containing set rules and outcomes. So players are just decision makers. And when I talk about outcomes or payoffs, I mean what a player receives based on the set of choices that both they make and the other decision makers in the game make. This can be described in any quantifiable form. Most usually you see it talked about in terms of dollars. Game theory is primarily used in microeconomics, but in other fields of study, it's influenced thinking as well to understand why decision makers do what they do. In business, it helps us to understand our competitors' actions and reactions, as well as not just our competitors, but the other possible players in a business game. Bradenberg and Nail-Bluff talk about the value net, and Porter's Five Forces also introduces some other potential players you might consider when you're thinking about who else might be involved in a business game. But we all know we don't make decisions in a vacuum. Your competitors and the other members of a business ecosystem are going to react to your strategic choices. So if you come up with a strategy without ever taking into account how your competitors or other parts of the business ecosystem will respond, it probably was a flawed strategy to begin with. So let's talk about a specific example of a game. So a game is any set of circumstances that has a result dependent on the actions of two or more decision makers. So this example is called a prisoner's dilemma. You may have heard of it before, and it's defined mostly by the specific payoffs and rules inherent in this game. So the classic story of the prisoner's dilemma is that two friends go and rob a bank. The two accomplices are now captured and being kept separately at the police station. So they must decide independently of each other whether to confess and implicate their friend for a reduced sentence or to stay silent. So they're both better off if neither of them confesses, but can they trust their friend to not confess? Because they'll be the worst off if their friend confesses and they don't. So hopefully you never find yourself in that particular situation, but there are common parallels in business and life. Two companies might be better off not cutting prices, but each has a private incentive to do so. Countries may prefer if everyone limited carbon emissions, but each country itself has a private incentive not to limit themselves. Two companies might be better off not advertising, but both have a private incentive to do so. Let's run with that last example. So here we're presenting in a simple matrix form the payoffs for a prisoner's dilemma game. You are the CEO of your company and you have to decide whether to advertise or not. These are your payoffs in dollars, or you can say thousands of dollars or millions of dollars, based on your decision to advertise or not. Obviously, it costs you some money to advertise, but you gain new customers and new business by advertising. So we're going to use this matrix to understand what our optimal strategy is. And in the context of game theory, when I say strategy, I mean a complete plan of action a player will take given the set of circumstances that might arise within the game. So we're player 2. That means our payoffs are presented in the second half of this matrix. We're the bold numbers. So if we advertise and our closest competitor advertises, then the payoffs are 3, 3. We each gain $3,000 or $3 million, whatever you'd like. If we don't advertise and our closest competitor doesn't advertise, we each gain $5 million or $5,000 because we save the cost of advertising. So if we advertise, though, and our competitor doesn't advertise, we gain, say, $8 million and they gain nothing. And vice versa is true. If they advertise and we don't, we gain nothing and our closest competitor gains $8 million. So take a minute looking at these payoffs and think about what choice you would make. These are, you maybe have this much information, right? You can approximate what your competitors' payoffs might look like, but you don't know their choices yet. So based on that you're making a decision simultaneously, you're just like that prisoner in the other room, and you want to know if your friend's confessing or not. You're now sitting in the other room, and you want to know if your competitor's advertising or not. So in a prisoner's dilemma, there is what's called a dominant strategy. That means you have a best response regardless of what another player's choice is. So there are times where you might have a different response depending on what your competitor does, or you have better payoffs in different scenarios depending on what your competitor does. But if you have to make decisions simultaneously, in all scenarios in a prisoner's dilemma, both you and your competitor will advertise. So both those prisoners are going to confess. And while the socially optimal outcome is for everybody to not advertise because both of you have higher payoffs in that scenario, you can't trust your competitor to not advertise. And so you know that you will advertise. You also know, though, that you shouldn't hold out hope for that payout of $8 million because you know that your competitor has the same or very similar payoffs as you. So you can predict their actions ahead of time. You know which box you're going to end up landing in because not only do you know what choice is best for you, you know what choice is best for your competitor. So what is a prisoner's dilemma exactly? I told you it's a common game. I told you there are some parallels, prisoners confessing, advertising. A prisoner's dilemma is a scenario where both players have dominant strategies. These strategies lead to a suboptimal social outcome. So again, the ideal social outcome is that nobody advertises, but without trust or sequential decision making or some other change in the way this game, the rules of this game, you guys are both going to land in this suboptimal box, and you can predict that ahead of time. So in the real world, there are many different games depending on what incentives look like. So I've given you the example of prisoner's dilemma, but please do not make the mistake of now recognizing every single situation as a prisoner's dilemma, because it's not always clear that you are going to end up in a suboptimal social outcome or that you face the same payoffs as your competitor. There are lots of nuances to these games. In the real world, we don't exactly know our competitors' payoffs either. And we may not even know our own payoffs, but we maybe have a rough estimate of both of them. Players might also have non-rational reasons for behaving differently than our predictions. Whenever There's behavior that isn't explained in a rational economic sense. You start diving into the realm of perhaps behavioral economics and kind of getting away from something like game theory. But know that there are scenarios where maybe a different player might choose a suboptimal outcome that isn't purely based on economic reasoning. For example, some businesses might choose to continue operating a business that is losing money because it creates jobs and they've received funding from the government, or they're trying to curry favor with someone. So there are other decision-making factors that may not be easily quantifiable in a nice little 4x4 matrix. My last point is that in the business world, most interactions are repeated interactions. You don't make a decision one day that affects your competitor and then never see that competitor again. You will be making decisions every single day that affects your competitor. This is what game theorists would call an iterated game. So there's more incentive in an iterated game to build trust. Trust was obviously missing in the prisoner's dilemma, and that is why it led to a suboptimal social outcome. In repeated games, because you're going to be seeing the same people over and over again, you hope to build trust and move towards a better outcome for everyone involved. We are going to look at a few different examples in this week's reading. One focuses particularly on market entry. So market entry is a little bit of a special case because I just said most business games are iterated games, but market entry can look a little bit more like a one-time game. And there's differences depending on where you are sequentially, whether you're the pioneer that arrived first in the market, or the incumbent that's already in the market versus being a later entrant or a new entrant coming along later. The way the outcomes and the strategies available to you will look different. Some general guidance there. As a new entrant, think about entering in a market with a different strategy or positioning than incumbents, focusing on a niche with relatively few customers and demonstrating credibly in order to build trust with those incumbents that you do not plan on expanding, or price in a way that it's not worth it for an incumbent to fight for the customers you're going after. And if you want to know what does it mean to say not worth it, revisit some of the readings on economics for strategists, and think about pricing decisions and where companies will price in both the short term and in the long term. So Bradenberg and Nailbuff left you with this very helpful acronym, PARTS: players, added value, rules, tactics, and scope. The article you read called The Right Game doesn't give you guidance on how to find that optimal strategy to improve your outcome in a specific game. What they give you is guidance on how to change the game to make sure you're in the best possible game, if that makes sense. So you can change those rules. You can change who's involved in the game. There are a number of different ways you can do that. So pay careful attention to how they're discussing the different players in the value net and different potential options to modify a game to make it more beneficial to you.